The pressure was a physical thing, a solid wall of dark water pressing in on all sides. Anya Sharma's world had been reduced to the rhythmic rasp of the rebreather, the gentle hiss of released bubbles, and the steady metronomic beat of her own heart in her ears. 300 feet down, in the blackness of the training tank, light was a memory. Time was a concept measured only by the oxygen in her closed circuit system and the mission clock glowing faintly on her wrist. Her movements were fluid, economical, each fin kick a deliberate transfer of energy, propelling her through the simulated wreck of a submarine hull. The cold seeped through her dive suit, a familiar embrace that sharpened the mind, stripping away everything but the objective. Plant the limpet mine, verify placement, and exfiltrate without a trace. Her fingers, sure and practiced in the thick neoprene gloves, found the magnetic anchor points on the steel plate, a soft click, then another. She ran her hand over the device, confirming the seal, her touch as precise as a surgeon's. The green light on her wrist console blinked once. Mission complete. She pushed off the hull, a ghost in the manufactured abyss, and began her slow, controlled ascent. The pressure lessened with each foot, the world expanding around her. The surface shimmered above, a distant, wavering ceiling of silver. As her head broke the water, the world returned in a rush of sound and sensation. The sterile, chlorinated air of the indoor facility, the echoing voices of the support crew, the stark fluorescent lights overhead. She unseated her mouthpiece, tasting the air, her breathing still slow and deep, her body already recalibrating to the surface world. A young petty officer, his face earnest and professional, reached down to help her onto the platform. "Time on target, 5 seconds inside the window, Master Chief," he reported, his voice tinged with the respect reserved for operators of her caliber. Anya simply nodded, pulling herself from the water with a smooth, efficient motion that betrayed no fatigue. The weight of the sodden gear was immense, yet she moved as if unburdened. As the crew began to help her strip the equipment, another figure approached, holding a towel and a secure satellite phone. It was Commander Vale, her unit's CO. His expression was neutral, which in their world often meant something was wrong. "Sharma," he said, his voice low, "you have a call. It's from the Provost Marshal's office at Camp Pendleton." Anya paused, her hand halfway to unclipping her harness. Pendleton. Her son Leo was there for the week, part of a young Marines orientation program she had reluctantly agreed to. It was supposed to be about discipline, structure, a taste of a world far from her own. She took the phone, her wet fingers leaving dark prints on the casing. Vale held up a hand to the support crew, giving her a bubble of privacy. She pressed the phone to her ear. The voice on the other end was formal, clipped, and held a tone of weary bureaucracy. It was a Colonel Hayes, the base commander. He spoke of an incident. "A minor disciplinary issue," he called it. "Some roughhousing in the barracks. Your son, Leo, was involved." The words were carefully chosen, designed to minimize, to manage. But Anya had spent 2 decades dissecting language, listening for what was not said. She heard the hesitation, the slight edge of concern buried under layers of institutional procedure. She looked past Vale at the dark water of the tank she had just left. A controlled environment, predictable, with clear rules of engagement. The world outside it was rarely so simple. "I'm on my way," she said, her voice flat and calm. "The only ground that truly mattered was the one your children stood on." She handed the phone back to Vale. "I need to go." The drive from Coronado to Pendleton was a transition between worlds. Anya drove a nondescript sedan, a civilian vehicle that blended seamlessly into the Southern California traffic. She had showered and changed, not into a uniform, but into jeans, a plain gray t-shirt, and sturdy boots. To any observer, she was just a woman, perhaps in her late 30s, with a focused set of her jaw and an economy of motion that hinted at an athletic background. Her dark hair was pulled back in a severe, functional knot. She did not listen to the radio. The silence in the car was a tool, allowing her to process, to compartmentalize. The adrenaline from the dive was a low thrum in her veins, but her mind was cold, clear. Minor disciplinary issue. Roughhousing. These were sanitized terms. In her experience, institutions, especially military ones, used such language to reframe events, to control the narrative before it could even form. She thought of Leo. He was 16, tall for his age but still carrying the lanky awkwardness of adolescence. He was quiet, observant, with her eyes in a thoughtful disposition that she knew could be mistaken for weakness in an environment that prized overt aggression. She had wanted the program to build his confidence, to show him a different kind of strength. Now she wondered if she had just fed him to wolves. Her life was a carefully constructed fortress of discipline and control, a necessity for the work she did. That control meant distance, extended absences where she was a voice on a phone, a face on a screen. Guilt was a luxury she could not afford, a corrosive emotion that compromised operational readiness. But, as the miles of asphalt unspooled before her, a cold knot tightened in her stomach. It was not guilt, it was a protective instinct, ancient and absolute, an emotion far more potent than any training could instill or erase. As she approached the main gate of Camp Pendleton, the sheer scale of the base was imposing. Razor wire, concrete barriers, and the crisp uniforms of the Marine sentries projected an aura of unyielding order. She pulled up to the guardhouse, her window down. The young Marine in the booth was sharp, his movements precise. He took her identification, his eyes scanning it, then her face. "Ma'am, your reason for visit?" "I'm here to see my son, Leo Sharma," she replied, her tone even. "I was called by Colonel Hayes." The Marine's posture relaxed infinitesimally. The tension in his shoulders eased. He saw her plain clothes, her civilian car, and his internal classification system slotted her into a familiar category. A concerned parent. A mom. His professional demeanor remained, but the edge of high alert was gone. "Yes, ma'am. We were told to expect you. He's at the 2nd Battalion Barracks. Let me get you a pass and a map." He handed her the documents with a polite, slightly dismissive smile. It was the kind of smile reserved for civilians, for outsiders who could not possibly comprehend the world within these gates. Anya took the pass, her expression unreadable. She had spent a career being underestimated. It was an advantage she had learned to cultivate. She navigated the base's grid of streets, her gaze sweeping over everything. She noted the placement of buildings, the flow of personnel, the types of vehicles moving along the roads. She saw squads of Marines jogging in formation, their chants cutting through the air. The place smelled of diesel, salt air from the nearby ocean, and discipline. It was a world built on structure and hierarchy, a system she understood intimately, even from the outside. The barracks were long, 2-story buildings of beige brick, functional and devoid of any aesthetic softness. She parked in a visitor spot and killed the engine. For a long moment she sat, watching. She saw young men, barely older than Leo, moving with the swagger that came with belonging to something larger than themselves. She saw the rigid lines, the uniformity. And she saw the potential for cruelty that such systems could foster when leadership was lax. She took a slow, deep breath, the kind she took before breaching a door or beginning a long fin swim. Then, she got out of the car. Colonel Hayes's office was what she expected. Wood paneling, flags standing in polished brass holders, and walls adorned with unit citations and photographs of men in dress blues. The air was thick with the scent of floor polish and old paper. Hayes himself was a man in his 50s, with a weathered face and the ramrod posture of a career officer. He stood when she entered, his handshake firm but brief. He gestured for her to sit in a hard-backed chair. "Mrs. Sharma," he began, his tone professional, yet carrying a clear undercurrent of condescension. "Thank you for coming in so promptly. As I said on the phone, we've had a minor incident." He sat behind his large desk, creating a physical barrier that reinforced his authority. "These young men are in a high-pressure environment. We're trying to instill the Marine Corps ethos. It involves physical and mental challenges. Sometimes things can get a little boisterous." He steepled his fingers, looking at her as if she were a schoolteacher who failed to understand the nature of boys. "Leo is a good kid. A little on the quiet side, perhaps. He's struggling to integrate with the more assertive members of his platoon." Anya said nothing. She simply watched him, her stillness a stark contrast to his fidgeting with a pen on his desk. Her silence seemed to unnerve him. He cleared his throat and continued. "There was an altercation last night, some pushing and shoving in the barracks. Your son ended up with a split lip. It was a matter of boys being boys. The other boy has been reprimanded." "I'd like to see my son," Anya said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through his monologue, leaving no room for further explanation. Hayes paused, slightly taken aback. "Of course. I've asked Sergeant Deckard to bring him here. The sergeant is the NCO in charge of the program. He has the situation well in hand." The door opened, and a man in his late 20s entered, followed by Leo. The sergeant was thick-set, with a bull neck and an arrogant carriage. His uniform was immaculate, but his eyes held a dismissive smirk. This was Deckard. He held Leo by the upper arm, a gesture that was meant to look supportive but was clearly about control. Leo looked at the floor, refusing to meet her eyes. Anya's gaze went straight to her son's face. The colonel had set a split lip. He hadn't mentioned the dark purplish bruise swelling under his left eye, or the way he held his right side as if his ribs were taped. "Ma'am," Deckard said, his voice a low rumble of false sincerity. "Sergeant Deckard, your boy here is having a tough time. This is a demanding environment. It's not for everyone. Some kids are just softer than others." He released Leo's arm and gave him a light shove toward the chair next to Anya. Anya ignored Deckard completely. She looked only at Leo, her expression unchanging. "Leo, look at me." Slowly, her son raised his head. She saw the shame in his eyes, the hurt. He was trying to be strong, to not let her see how much this had affected him. Her own gaze softened for a fraction of a second, a silent communication that passed between them. Then it hardened again as she turned her attention back to the two Marines. "Colonel," she said, her voice dropping a register, becoming colder, more precise. "Who reprimanded the other boy?" Deckard stepped forward slightly. "I handled it, ma'am. A few extra push-ups, a verbal warning." They shook hands. "It's over." His tone implied that her presence was an unnecessary, hysterical female intrusion into the world of men. He looked her up and down, taking in her civilian clothes, her average height. He saw a mother, nothing more. He underestimated her. He had no idea the mistake he was making. "I see," Anya said, the words hanging in the air like ice crystals. She stood up. "Sergeant Deckard, you run training exercises for these boys, correct?" Deckard puffed out his chest. "Yes, ma'am. We teach them basic drills, discipline, hand-to-hand combat fundamentals." "Show me," Anya said. It wasn't a request. Colonel Hayes looked confused. "Mrs. Sharma, I don't think this is the time or place." "I want to understand the demanding environment my son is in," Anya interrupted, her eyes locked on Deckard. "The sergeant was just explaining how some people are softer than others. I'd like to see the standard you're holding them to." Deckard's smirk widened into a grin. This was territory he understood. A challenge from a woman. He glanced at the colonel, who gave a hesitant nod, clearly wanting this uncomfortable meeting to be over. "All right, ma'am," Deckard said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's go out to the training floor. Maybe you can show us how a mom would handle it." The training floor was a large, open room with padded gray mats. A group of about 20 teenagers, Leo's group, were standing around, ostensibly practicing drills, but mostly talking amongst themselves. They fell silent as Colonel Hayes, Sergeant Deckard, Anya, and Leo entered. Their eyes went to Leo, and a few of them snickered. Anya saw it, filing it away. Deckard called for a volunteer, a young, wiry Marine corporal named Evans, who stepped forward eagerly. "All right, listen up," Deckard barked, his voice echoing in the gymnasium. "We're going to demonstrate a simple control technique, a wrist lock and takedown. This is for when a subject is non-compliant, but you don't need to use lethal force." He grabbed Corporal Evans's arm. His movements were fast and aggressive, relying entirely on strength. He twisted the corporal's wrist, forcing him to his knees with a grunt of pain. It was sloppy, a brute force maneuver that caused unnecessary pain and had several points of failure. Deckard was showing off, not teaching. "See," he said, breathing heavily. "Dominate your opponent. Control the situation." He released Evans, who stood up, rubbing his wrist. Deckard then turned to Anya, a theatrical flourish of his hand. "There you have it, ma'am. Simple, effective." His eyes gleamed with mockery. "Now, as I was saying, some people just don't have the grit for this." Anya walked onto the mat, her boots making no sound. The air in the room grew still. The boys, the Marines, even the colonel were watching her. She was an anomaly in their world of uniformed masculinity. "Your technique is incorrect," she said, her voice calm and clear, carrying easily across the room. You rely on muscle. That creates resistance. You hurt your partner and you expose your flank. Deckard's face darkened. Is that right? I've been training Marines for 6 years. Then you've been doing it wrong for 6 years, Anya stated, not with anger, but with the simple certainty of a physicist correcting a math equation. She looked at him. Let me demonstrate. He laughed, a short, sharp bark. Be my guest. He stood before her, crossing his thick arms, a smug look on his face. He was bigger, stronger, a trained Marine. She was a civilian, a mom. Attack me, Anya said. The smirk vanished from Deckard's face, replaced by disbelief. What? Grab my throat, she instructed, her voice unwavering. Use both hands. Try to choke me. A nervous murmur went through the room. Colonel Hayes took a step forward. Sergeant, perhaps this isn't— It's fine, sir, Deckard said, his ego now fully engaged. He couldn't back down in front of his trainees. He looked at Anya. You're sure about this, lady? Anya just waited, her body relaxed, her hands hanging loosely at her sides. Her posture was neutral, balanced. Deckard took a deep breath and lunged. His hands were big, powerful, and they closed around her neck with brutal force. He expected her to panic, to struggle, to claw at his hands. She did none of those things. The instant his thumbs made contact with her windpipe, her body moved. It wasn't a flurry of motion. It was a single, seamless action. She didn't try to pull his hands away. Instead, she turned her chin down, protecting her airway, and simultaneously brought her own hands up inside his arms. Her palms struck the soft inner part of his elbows, hyperextending them just enough to break his grip. At the exact same moment, she shifted her weight, stepping not back but to the side and slightly forward, moving inside his center of gravity. Her hip checked his, disrupting his balance. His forward momentum, which he had intended to use against her, suddenly became his own enemy. He was falling, but he didn't know why. As he stumbled past her, she didn't push him. She guided him. One of her hands slid from his elbow to the back of his neck. The other found his belt. She redirected his fall, using his own weight and momentum to spin him. He landed flat on his back on the mat with a loud, hollow thud that knocked the wind out of him. It was over in less than 2 seconds. Anya stood over him, not even breathing hard. She hadn't thrown a punch. She hadn't used any visible effort. She had simply used his own force against him, with perfect timing and a flawless understanding of biomechanics. The entire room was utterly silent. The boys stared, their jaws slack. Corporal Evans's eyes were wide with shock. Colonel Hayes looked as if he'd seen a ghost. Deckard lay on the mat, gasping for air, his face a mask of humiliation and disbelief. Anya looked down at him, her expression unreadable. That, she said, her voice still quiet but now resonating with an authority that had nothing to do with rank, is how you control a situation. Just as the silence in the room reached its most profound point, a piercing klaxon began to blare. Red lights flashed on the walls, bathing the gymnasium in a pulsating, urgent crimson. A digitized voice, devoid of emotion, echoed from the overhead speakers. Wildfire alert. Condition red. Fire has breached the northern perimeter. All personnel in training areas, Zulu. And X-ray. Evacuate immediately. The calm of the training room was shattered. Marines began shouting, running past the doorway. The boys in the program looked around in a panic, their bravado gone, replaced by the naked fear of teenagers. Colonel Hayes was already on his radio, his face grim, his voice sharp with command. Get me a sit rep from the fire base. What's the wind speed and direction? Where is the front line? Deckard scrambled to his feet, his face still flushed with shame, now overlaid with the urgency of the alarm. He started barking orders at the boys, trying to regain his lost authority. Get in line! Single file! Move! But his voice was tight, strained. The absolute certainty he had projected moments before was gone. Anya's attention, however, was elsewhere. She moved to the large window that overlooked the northern hills of the base. In the distance, a colossal plume of black and gray smoke billowed into the sky, churning and expanding with terrifying speed. At its base, a vibrant, angry line of orange flickered, consuming the dry brush. The wind, she noted, was strong and erratic, whipping the smoke into a frenzy. This was not a small brush fire. This was a monster. A young officer ran into the room, his face pale and streaked with sweat. He saluted the colonel. "Sir, we've lost contact with Recon Team Bravo. They were on a long-range observation exercise in Zulu 7, right on the edge of the impact area. Their comms are dead. The atmospheric interference from the smoke and heat is blocking everything. Hayes swore under his breath, turning to a large topographical map on the wall. Zulu 7 was a remote, rugged canyon system miles from the nearest paved road. The primary access was a single fire road that, according to the map, was now directly in the fire's path. "Get air ops on the line," Hayes commanded. "I want a chopper in the air for rescue now." The officer shook his head. "Negative, sir. The smoke column is too thick and the updrafts are extreme. Air ops has grounded everything. They can't fly in these conditions." The command staff in the room began to operate on procedure, pulling up schematics, shouting coordinates, but an undercurrent of controlled panic was beginning to set in. They were map reading, planning for a situation based on data that was already minutes, if not an hour, out of date. The fire was moving faster than their information. Anya watched them for a moment, her mind processing the variables with the same dispassionate clarity she applied to a mission brief. She saw the wind direction, the steepness of the terrain on the map, the type of fuel, dry chaparral, that would burn with explosive intensity. She understood what the men in the room, for all their training, had not yet grasped. This was no longer a logistical problem, it was a tactical one. The environment itself had become the enemy. The wind shifted. It was a tangible event, a violent gust that rattled the thick windows of the gymnasium and sent a cascade of dust and ash raining down outside. The sky, which had been a hazy yellow, darkened to a bruised orange. The smell of smoke, once distant, was now thick and acrid in the air, seeping through the building's ventilation system. The lights overhead flickered once, twice, then died, plunging the room into the eerie, dim glow of the emergency strobes. The backup generators had failed. A new wave of fear rippled through the young boys huddled near Deckard. They were trapped in a concrete box, watching the world outside turn into an inferno. On the colonel's radio, a frantic voice crackled, "Command, this is fire control. The wind has shifted 180 degrees. I repeat, the wind has shifted. The fire front has jumped the main fire break. It's moving west, directly towards the main cantonment area. All access roads from the north are cut off." The news landed like a physical blow. The command staff around the map table froze. Their neat, orderly plans, their arrows and evacuation routes were now useless. The fire wasn't just trapping the recon team anymore. It was now bearing down on the base itself. The single road they had planned to use for a rescue was now a wall of flame. The secondary roads were little more than dirt tracks, impassable for their heavy rescue vehicles, and now likely blocked by the fire as well. They were blind. Their technology had failed, their procedures were inadequate, and the terrain, which they only knew from maps, had turned against them. The digital displays were blank, the radios were filled with static, and the smoke was so thick that visual confirmation was impossible. They had lost control. Deckard, his face pale, was trying to maintain order among the panicked youths, but his commands were hollow, lacking the conviction of a leader who knew what to do. He was just shouting into the growing chaos. Colonel Hayes stood staring at the useless map, his jaw tight, the immense weight of his command pressing down on him. He was a good administrator, a competent officer in a world of rules and regulations, but this was different. This was primal. The environment was actively trying to kill his men, and his system had broken down. Anya walked through the chaos as if it were a minor inconvenience. The dim, flashing lights cast long, dancing shadows, but her steps were sure. She moved past the shouting officers and the frightened boys, her focus absolute. She stopped at the large topographical map, which was now only faintly visible in the emergency light. She ran her fingers over the contour lines, her touchlight, reading the terrain. The others saw a maze of canyons and ridges. She saw pathways and obstacles, funnels for wind and fire, and corridors of relative safety. She was not seeing a map. She was seeing the ground itself. She placed her finger on the location of the trapped recon team, Zulu 7. Then, she traced a line with her finger, not along the red-marked roads, but down the thin blue line of a dry creek bed, through a series of ravines, and behind a large granite ridge that was not marked as a significant feature on the standard issue maps. Her voice cut through the noise, not loud but sharp and clear, compelling immediate silence. "The wind is coming from the east now," she stated, her tone devoid of any emotion. "It will follow the path of least resistance. It will pour into this main canyon like a river, and the fire will move with it. Your primary and secondary roads are death traps." All eyes turned to her. In the flickering red light, her face was a mask of calm intensity. She looked like she belonged there more than any of them. "But the fire will also create a backdraft here," she continued, tapping a narrow, winding canyon system, "and this granite ridge will split the main front. For about 20 minutes, it will create a shadow, a corridor of cooler air. The dry creek bed on the western face of that ridge will be shielded. It's not a road. It's rough terrain, but it's passable for a light all-terrain vehicle. It will take you to within 500 meters of their position. It's their only way out, and you have to go now." She wasn't making a suggestion. She was laying out the only viable tactical solution. Her analysis was swift, precise, and utterly confident. She spoke about fire dynamics and terrain features with an intimacy that stunned the room into submission. Colonel Hayes stared at her, then at the map, seeing the logic in her words. He saw the path she had traced, a path none of his men had considered because it wasn't an official route. It was a path an infiltrator would use. His mind flashed back to the effortless way she had put Sergeant Deckard on the ground. The quiet authority in her voice was not born of theory. It was born of experience in places far worse than this. The institutional arrogance that had clouded his judgment evaporated, replaced by the pragmatic need to save his men. He looked at Deckard, whose aggressive, by-the-book plans were now useless ash. Then he looked back at Anya. He didn't ask her who she was. He didn't ask her how she knew. He simply made the decision of a true commander. He trusted competence. "Tell us what you need," he said. Anya's response was immediate. "One light, all-terrain vehicle. The 6-wheel variant if you have it. 3 people besides myself, one of them a medic. I need fire-retardant blankets, 4 personal fire shelters, extra water, and a chainsaw. And I need them 5 minutes ago." She turned to Corporal Evans, the young Marine Deckard had used in his demonstration. His eyes were wide, but he was listening, truly listening. "Corporal, you're with me. You look like you can follow an order." She then glanced at Deckard, her gaze cold and appraising. "Sergeant, you're coming too. You put my son in this situation. You will help get these Marines out." It was not a punishment, it was a statement of responsibility. Deckard, stripped of. His bluster could only nod, his face a mixture of fear and a dawning, terrible respect. A medic was found, a quiet, professional corpsman, and the small team assembled by the vehicle bay as the world outside grew darker and the roar of the fire grew louder. They were going into the heart of the beast, led by a civilian woman in a t-shirt and jeans. Colonel Hayes handed her a radio. "It's line of sight only. It might not work in the canyons." "It won't," she said, clipping it to her belt anyway. "We'll be on our own." She looked at Leo, who had been watching everything with a mixture of terror and awe. "Stay with the colonel. Do exactly as he says." She put a hand on his shoulder, a brief, firm squeeze. Then she turned, climbed into the driver's seat of the stripped-down vehicle, and started the engine. Without a backward glance, she drove them out of the bay and into the swirling smoke. The world outside the barracks was an apocalyptic vision. The air was thick with ash and embers, glowing like malevolent fireflies in the smoke-choked twilight. The heat was a physical presence pressing in on them, sucking the moisture from the air. The roar of the approaching fire was a constant, deafening bass note that vibrated through the vehicle's frame and into their bones. Anya drove with an unnerving calm, her eyes narrowed, scanning the terrain ahead. She didn't use the headlights. They would only reflect off the dense smoke, blinding her. Instead, she navigated by instinct and memory, following the faint outline of the dry creek bed she had identified on the map. Corporal Evans sat beside her, clutching his rifle, his knuckles white. The medic was in the back, checking his supplies, his movements precise and automatic. Deckard sat beside him, silent, his face a pale mask in the orange glow. The bravado and arrogance were gone, burned away by the sheer overwhelming reality of their situation. They bounced and jolted over rocks and through deep ruts, the vehicle's engine straining. Embers rained down on them, some as large as a man's fist, sizzling on the metal hood. Anya drove without hesitation, weaving the vehicle through the treacherous landscape with a skill that was both terrifying and mesmerizing to watch. She was one with the machine, an extension of its capabilities. At one point, a burning eucalyptus tree crashed down across their path, blocking the way. Before Evans could even react, Anya had the vehicle in reverse, grabbing the chainsaw from the back. "Deckard, you're on fire watch," she ordered. "Evans, clear the branches as I cut." She jumped out, the chainsaw roaring to life in her hands. She moved with a woodsman's efficiency, cutting the thick trunk into sections, while Deckard and Evans, their faces covered with breathing masks, frantically beat back the flames and dragged the heavy logs aside. The heat was intense, blistering their exposed skin. But under her calm, focused direction, they cleared the path in under 2 minutes and were moving again. They found the recon team huddled behind a rock outcropping, their faces black with soot, their eyes wide with fear. One of them had a broken leg, a nasty compound fracture, and the team's medic was struggling to keep him stable. They were out of water and completely cut off. The fire was cresting the ridge above them, a wave of liquid flame preparing to crash down into the canyon. The rescued Marines stared at Anya as she approached. They saw a woman appearing out of the smoke and chaos, her face determined, her presence radiating a powerful, unsettling calm. "We're getting you out," she said simply. "Medic, get him ready to move. Evans, help him." As they worked to load the injured Marine onto the vehicle, Deckard, his nerve finally cracking under the pressure, grabbed Anya's arm. "This is insane," he yelled over the roar of the fire. "Your route is collapsing. We should head straight for the East Ridge. It's closer. It's a straight shot." He was pointing towards a wall of smoke and flame, his tactical sense completely eroded by fear. He was reverting to his aggressive instincts. Charge forward, push through. Anya didn't even look at him. She continued securing the straps on the injured man's litter. "The wind is funneling through that pass," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "The temperature there is over 1,000 degrees. It's a furnace. We go back the way we came, now." "I'm the senior NCO here," Deckard screamed, his voice raw with panic. "I'm giving an order. We go east." He tried to pull rank, to reassert the authority he had lost. He reached for Corporal Evans, trying to pull him away from the vehicle. "Evans, you follow my order." Anya moved. It was not the fluid defensive action from the training mat. This was something else entirely. She crossed the space between them in a single step. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't have to. She got directly in his face, her body language a wall of absolute certainty. Her eyes, reflecting the flames around them, were like chips of obsidian. "You have no authority here," she said, her voice a low, cold whisper that cut through the fire's roar. "You are a passenger. You will sit down, you will shut up, and you will do exactly as I say, or I will leave you here. There is no debate. There is only survival. We are leaving, now." In that moment, Deckard finally saw her. He wasn't looking at a mom or a civilian. He was looking at an operator, a predator whose calm was infinitely more terrifying than his own panic. He saw a level of will and discipline he had only ever read about in citations. The fight went out of him completely. His shoulders slumped, he looked away from her gaze, defeated not by force, but by a strength he could not comprehend. He stumbled to the vehicle and climbed in without another word. The confrontation was over. Anya gave the driver's seat to Evans. "Follow our tracks back. Don't stop for anything." She took up a position on the rear of the vehicle, her eyes scanning the fire behind them, a silent guardian watching their retreat from hell. They burst out of the smoke-filled canyon just as the first massive firefighting helicopter, a sky crane, was making a water drop on the edge of the base. The return journey had been a nightmare of collapsing terrain and encroaching flames, but Evans, guided by Anya's terse, precise instructions, had navigated it flawlessly. They rolled onto the scorched asphalt of a base road, looking like specters from another world, the vehicle scorched, their faces and clothes covered in a thick layer of soot and ash. Medical teams swarmed the vehicle, pulling the injured Marine out and attending to the exhausted recon team. No one spoke. The rescued Marines looked at Anya, their expressions a mixture of awe and disbelief. They knew, with absolute certainty, that they were alive because of her. Colonel Hayes ran up to the vehicle, his face etched with relief. He saw his men, alive. He saw Deckard sitting slumped in the back, a broken man. And he saw Anya standing tall, her face grimy but her eyes clear and alert as she scanned the perimeter. The chaos of the fire was beginning to be replaced by the organized chaos of the response. The immediate danger had passed. Hayes walked over to her, stopping a few feet away. The noise of the helicopters and the shouting of the firefighters swirled around them, but for a moment, they were in their own bubble of silence. He looked at her, truly looked at her this time, seeing the immense competence, the disciplined power she carried so quietly. He saw the way the other Marines gave her a wide berth, the way they looked at her with a new, profound respect. The question he had held back before now had to be asked. "Who are you?" he said, his voice quiet, stripped of all rank and pretense. Anya held his gaze for a long moment, then turned to look for her son. Leo was standing near a command vehicle, safe. Their eyes met across the chaotic scene, and he gave her a small, shaky smile. She turned back to the colonel. "I'm Leo's mother," she said, and left it at that. Later, in the quiet of the colonel's now functional office, the official debrief took place. The rescued recon team leader gave his report, his voice hoarse. He described the fire, their entrapment, and their rescue. When he spoke of Anya, his voice was filled with a reverence that silenced the room. "She came out of the smoke. She knew the ground better than our maps. She led us through a wall of fire. Sir, I have never seen anything like it." Colonel Hayes listened, his expression grim. The reports of the bullying incident now sat on his desk, feeling trivial and yet profoundly significant. He understood now that Deckard's failure of character in the barracks was intrinsically linked to his failure of command in the field. His ego, his need to dominate, had made him both a bully and a liability. When the debrief was over, Hayes dismissed everyone, except Deckard. The door closed, and the dressing down that followed was quiet, methodical, and career-ending. Deckard was formally relieved of his command and confined to quarters pending a full investigation that everyone knew would end with his discharge. The system, though slow and imperfect, was beginning to correct itself. As Anya and Leo prepared to leave, Corporal Evans approached them. He stood before Anya, his posture rigid, but his eyes were filled with a humility she had not seen before. He did not offer excuses or flowery thanks. He simply said, "Thank you, ma'am." It was a simple phrase, but it carried the weight of a life saved and a worldview shattered. He then turned to Leo, who had been standing silently by his mother's side. Evans looked the boy in the eye and gave a short, sharp nod. It was an apology, a sign of respect, and a promise, all in one small gesture. Leo nodded back, standing a little taller than he had that morning. The institutional perception had shifted. Anya had not demanded respect. She had commanded it through action. She had dismantled a false narrative, not with words, but with undeniable competence. The Marines on that base would tell the story for years, about the day the fire came, and the quiet woman who walked into it and brought their brothers back. Anya and Leo were in the car, driving away from the base as the sun began to set. The sky behind them was a brilliant, bruised orange, the distant glow of the fire now a testament to a battle being won by others. The air still smelled of smoke. Leo was quiet for a long time, watching the landscape of Southern California slide by. The events of the day were settling within him, rearranging his understanding of the world, of strength, of his own mother. He had seen her through the eyes of others today, a dismissive sergeant, a respectful colonel, a terrified group of Marines, and he had seen her for who she truly was. He finally looked over at her. Her profile was calm, her hands steady at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, her focus on the road ahead. "They listened to you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. It was not a question, it was a statement of awe. Anya kept her eyes on the road. She drove in silence for another mile, the hum of the tires on the asphalt the only sound. Then she spoke, her voice calm and even, a simple statement of a truth forged in fire and darkness. The most important ground to hold is your own.